Hello and welcome. I am the Restless Kaiser.
And I'm Johnny B.
And I'm Nick.
But together we are
Modeling for
Advantage.
Beautiful,
Awesome.
beautiful sound. Right then, not too many early adopters tonight. We've just got Allard and Kevin Livesey. Both Allard and Kevin seem to be doing a bit of Dead Man's Hand. So there we go. Been playing a bit of that. Hobby-wise, I'm going to be putting another coat of paint onto a whole bunch of German tanks, both 15 and 25 mil, because it's pretty easy to do. Second coat of the... Oh, no, I can't see it. I thought I'd got out the middle stone, which is the Vallejo color I use for my German yellow. What about you, John?
I'm actually just going to continue with, for whatever reason, finish off the Atlas. And maybe do the archer as well. I don't know, but not a medieval archer like Nick. Nick's surely you're not doing any hobbying tonight, Nick. You've got all the words. But before you get into the words, could you tell our wonderful viewers at home where they can find you on the Tinterwebs?
I have a channel on YouTube called Medieval Wargamer. I'm basically using medieval stuff. That's obvious. And in Facebook also there's the same page and the same title. Basically, you know, it's a channel. It's quite, people know the channel. I mean, I've been doing 100 Years War for a long time, and recently I started Baron's War. I changed era for a while just for variety. And now the last few months I'm focusing on Baron Wars. I think Baron's War is going to take me, you know, I'm naming it Baron's War season. I think this whole year will go Baron's War.
Perfect.
Okay. Well, let's start there then. 100 Years War is what Nick the Greek is well known for, but 100 Years War is slightly more than 100 years, right, Nick?
116, I think, something like this. A few more years.
16.
Something like this.
And it really should have ended about the halfway mark, you know, with the Blind King of Bohemia and the Prince of Wales and all of that glorious stuff. Is that Cressy?
Yeah. It should have Cressy 1346, Poitiers 1356. This is the Edwardian period where, you know, you have the English dominating,
just hammering the French every weekend, right?
That's true.
Brilliant. History should just stop there.
Yeah, it should have stopped around 1356, but unfortunately, the Black Prince died from dysentery. Edward III died from and then you have the Caroline War it's called Caroline War because of the French. The Caroline War of the Caroline part of the war, where the French basically are taking back almost everything, and this has to do with probably one great commander, Bertrand Guesclin, who was basically one excellent commander, and he really understood that they could not beat the English in pitched battle, and he was fighting the same typical warfare that the English were fighting: sieges, chevauchés, you know, fast attacks and retreats. And in combination with the English having weak leaders at that period, you know, France got back almost everything except Calais and a little bit of Gascony.
Because it goes on for so long that these great captains that are the heroes of the first part of the war, they all get killed or they die of old age, or like the Black Prince, they get dysentery or whatever from this. I mean, medieval campaigning is like a proper high risk from the old shit yourself to death factor. It's quite common. That is how it will end if you campaign long enough.
That's true. That's true. And you, I mean, I can imagine in all campaigns, but if you study 100 Years War a bit more, you realize how important role the commanders play. and it's a matter of luck. You know, at that period of the Black Prince and Edward III, you had some amazing commanders, Northampton, Oxford, Reginald Cobham. You had a bunch of commanders who appeared at the same time at Salisbury. And then all these commanders die, and you know, their heirs are younger, because Salisbury's are there along the 100 Years' War, and all the family is really great. You have Salisbury, the Agincourt, and afterwards at Verneuil, and the siege of Orleans and everything. So, and then you have good commanders in France. You have basically Bertrand de Guesclin. I don't know how you pronounce it in English, because the name is strange. I would say if you go directly, it's Guesclin, but it's Guesclin in French. And he's a Breton. He's a great commander. He's not a noble. He's of a lower, you know, family breed. I mean, he's a lord, but not of the very high nobles. And you have a clever king, and they win everything back. And then again, you have a commander coming up, Henry V, basically. His father, Henry IV, was not really a great commander, or Richard, the son of the Black Prince. And then you have Henry V, and you have another great bunch of leaders. You have the Duke of Bedford, you have Salisbury, you have Talbot, you have a bunch of great leaders and captains that appear again. And then England is winning back everything, and even more than.
And this is the Agincourt.
This is the Lancastrian part of it. It's called the Lancastrian because of.
Yeah.
And then Henry V dies, and obviously you still have great commanders. You have Salisbury, you have Bedford, his brother, and they hold, you know, they hold the winnings in France. But obviously these people die. You start, you know, the Wars of the Roses start brewing. These great commanders. I don't know how to compare the. There's a question always for me, because I don't know much about War of the Roses, and at the early part of the 15th century, you have some really great commanders under Henry V. You have, as I told you, you have Stafford, you have Salisbury, you have Bedford, and I don't know how these commanders compare to the counterparts in the Wars of the Roses. If the Wars of the Roses, we had great commanders, or the reason for the Wars of the Roses, in my opinion, the reason for the Wars of the Roses was that the English didn't have anything to fight about in France. They lost everything, and that's my opinion. And because they were thrown out from France, they didn't have a strong leader. You know, usually civil wars start because you don't have anybody else to fight. You know what I'm saying? And I don't know how these commanders, these great commanders of the 100 Years, commanders of the Wars of the Roses. I don't know if they were the same or different, but not. But then, you know, the English basically in the Battle of Castillon lose, where Talbot is captured and killed. The last great, you know, the Achilles of the English, as it was called. But also the French managed to adapt and change. You know, if you read the English, the medieval history, but especially the English and the French history from the Barons' Wars, let's say, when you start from that period, the early late 13th century, you realize that the armies who develop and adapt their strategy to counter the foes are the ones that succeed. I'll give you an example. The English used to fight before, like the French, you know, the mounted knights, feudal system. That was how the English fought. That's why they were slaughtered in Bannockburn and from the Scots. When Robert the Bruce came and he understood that infantry and archers and long spears were the medicine to destroy the English, and that's why he was winning all the battles, because he evolved and he kept winning. But then you have Edward III, who realized that in order to beat the Scottish, you need to utilize your longbows, that nobody did. So the children and this foot formation that were so powerful during the early part of the first Scottish Wars of Independence, when Edward evolved the English army, changed the English army, you know, enforced all the English to fight on foot, provided this longbow, you know, fire that was not used before, because the longbow is there for since the Viking Age and the bodkin, but it was never used as a mass weapon. Edward III used it in the battle of in the Scottish Wars of Independence. So you see, Edward III evolved, and he created this strategy, and he annihilated the Scottish, and he was winning and annihilating the French. But then, at the beginning of the 15th century, the French realized that big armies were a hindrance than actually helping. In all the big battles, 20, 30, 40,000 French were basically killing each other before they reached the English, trampling each other. So when the French realized this at the mid of the 15th century, and their armies from then on were no more than 10,000, they were never fielding bigger armies than 10,000. But at the same time, they understood that in order to beat the English, they had to develop something that was stronger than the longbow. And they became experts in gunpowder. The French became experts in gunpowder at that time. And as soon as they became experts in gunpowder, the longbow was finished. And that's why the Battle of Castillon was won very easily. The French had the cannons, their bombards, and the longbowmen were not affected. So at that time, the English had to charge because they couldn't fight from far away. They were out distance. The cannons were stronger. So then the French annihilated them. So you see in history that the armies that develop, that manage to find something that will give them an edge over the strategy of their opponent, win. So the Scots developed and were winning. That's why Robert the Bruce became king. Then Edward III changed the strategy, brought the longbow, and after almost 100 years, the French managed to master cannons and gunpowder, and then they won the 100 Years' War.
So I obviously, very broadly speaking, what you just said is absolutely true. But I think, though, Nick, if you'll forgive me, you are overlooking military competence to a massive degree. I think it's one thing to look at it as it's a very modern way of looking at it as being it's a technological thing. Yeah, like the longbow is better, and the longbow defeats the kind of Scottish Chilterns and the French heavy cavalry, etc., from the 100 Years' War, and that's a way of looking at it. But what you said in amongst what you just said is really important in understanding this. Is these were not new technologies; it was the application of them. So if I give you a couple of examples from the real high point of the 100 Years' War for the English is that kind of is Cressy. This is when the Black Prince, Henry Edward says, "I'll let the boy win his spurs," doesn't he? When he's called for reinforcements and all that is. To give you an idea of how incompetent the French are in this battle, the first part of it is the French are using mercenary Genoese crossbowmen, the English are using the longbows, and it's been wet. So when they come to exchange the missiles in the kind of initial skirmish, the Genoese crossbows don't work because the strings are wet. They're also their pavises, these huge kind of man-sized shields that they would reload behind in a missile exchange, were left with the baggage. So these guys are stranded out in the open. Their crossbows don't work, and their longbowmen are just murdering them because the English longbowman knew to keep his strings dry, wore them under his hat. There's various stories.
Yeah, of course,
But so, what do the Genoese crossbowmen do then? Is they realize that they're getting hammered, their crossbows don't work, they start running away. To which the King of France tells his own troops to ride them down because they're scum.
Actually, was the brother of King of France, was Duke Alençon.
Okay.
Yeah.
The French knights ride down their own troops. In this battle, which is going quite badly for them at this point. It's like, these are scum, traitors, ride them down. Wow. So the French heavy cavalry charge off into still a hail of longbow fire to run down their own troops. The battle obviously goes badly. It just keeps getting worse than this. Although the English vanguard is under a lot of pressure, which is under the Black Prince.
It's obviously strategy, yes, because
So the guy who's in charge of the French vanguard, you couldn't begin to believe this. He's the king of Bohemia. He's one of the greatest knights in Christendom, but there is a slight problem. What's the slight problem with the king of Bohemia, Nick?
Well, glasses don't work with him at all.
He's blind. The captain of the French vanguard is fucking blind. Literally can't see. And he's in charge of directing the battle. The vanguard, the forward troops, anyway. And when it starts going really badly, he tells his squire to get him on his horse and point him in the direction of the enemy. And this blind king trots off on his horse to get slaughtered by the English. And this is not untrue. This is absolutely true. And this guy, he's a German prince, or a German king, the king of Bohemia. He doesn't have to be here. He's a volunteer. But he's very famous. He's been a great knight in his youth, campaigns in Italy, etc. So, you know, and the French have got the attachment to social class and prestige and chivalry and knightly codes. And so the blind king of Bohemia is one of the greatest knights in Christendom. It's got to be good to have him on your team. You've got to give him a big job. Only problem is the guy can't fucking see. And so important is this defeat that those ostrich feathers, which are the Prince of Wales symbol, you know, it's like on the British 2p coin. That's the livery of the Prince of Wales. That's the blind king of Bohemia's livery. Yeah, and the Black Prince takes it from him. Like,
because of his.
I'm having your symbol.
Yeah, that's true. Because of his his bravery and because he charged blind with his bodyguards. That's his second symbol. That's true. I mean, so what I mentioned before,
kind of military competence thing, because I think the same thing has happened at Bannockburn, right? Is you talked about great captains, and I think great captains are important because I think it's about impetus. I mean, there's a rule set you talked about called impetus, but I think the troops' confidence in the fact that they're going to win is why these 4,000 or 5,000 man British armies can beat these 20,000-30,000 man French armies. Is the British troops are confident that they're going to win, even though the odds are stacked against them, and the French army is totally incompetent.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But you have to understand that in these vast French armies, not everybody was fighting. It was impossible. Obviously, you have reserves, and the English didn't have as much. But it is not these 20,000, not even a quarter was fighting, not even maximum, the half were fighting, because they couldn't fight altogether. It was impossible to fight the English 20,000. There were reserves, and many of them were, lower born peasants who were fighting, or militia who never fought, who never took a chance. But having a great commander is very important. That's why I was saying at the beginning that a strategy also, what I was saying about weapon development, has to do obviously with the commanders who pushed towards this direction. For example, Edward, in my opinion, the greatest king of England was Edward III, by far. By far, there is no comparison, in my opinion. He developed the army. His strategy on dismounting the English and fighting in Harris formations and man-at-arms on foot was basically new. But as I said, because I was reading about this, the longbow, in a way, in a form, one another, not maybe the one that we had in Agincourt, but the longbow and the bodkin arrow were existing and since the Viking Age, I read, but nobody thought about using it the way Edward III used it. So obviously you have the weapons, but you need to know how to use them, and you need to know the strategy. But the English were lucky lucky in a way that if you read these three parts of the 100 Years' War, the Edwardian War, the Caroline War, and the Lancastrian War, forget about the longbow, forget about anything. You will realize that in the periods that the English were winning, they have great commanders, they had great captains, they had great nobles. You know, they had, as I said before, Northampton, Reginald Cobham, Salisbury, Bartholomew Burgess, all these were friends of the Black Prince, all were knighted together at Crecy. Then they were together at Poitiers and in the Poitiers campaign. And it's very important to have commanders who inspire and, you know, are great fighters. And that's how, I mean, not that the French didn't have, but the French were not, the English had a professional army afterwards, is what you said. The French were fighting still, the nobles mounted. It was embarrassing for them to fight on foot, or they just were impetuous and they were attacking. The English were an organized professional army with the longbows in the flanks, the men-at-arms and the retainers in the center. They were developing the army at the same time, obviously having, you know, great characters. So obviously, characters play an important role, and that's why at the end of the 100 Years' War, when Henry V died, all the English territories that were won, all Normandy was under the English occupation, and huge percentage of Gascony were not lost because you had commanders who took over. You had the Duke of Bedford, one of the greatest commanders in the 100 Years' War, who was the brother of the king. You had the Earl of Salisbury. You had great commanders. But when these guys died, then it was over. It was over for the English. It was over because was
the king. This is the period immediately before the Wars of the Roses, and as you kind of illustrated a little bit earlier, is this is one of this mad kings that we have, or as the medieval period. They're a bit strange around madness, medievalists, because the belief was that people who were insane were touched by God. So you can't just get rid of them in the same way. So they're particularly blessed people. Certainly if it's the king, probably if you were just a commoner, some scumbag, that might not have worked out for you. But you had this kind of king who was not competent and people had no faith in him. So it falls upon the king's lieutenants to take responsibility. But the big thing about these wars as well for England, not so much France, is they're very expensive. And the king needs to raise taxes to fight them, and he needs to convince Parliament that he's going to win. And Parliament doesn't think a mad king is going to win a war in France, and doesn't really care about the king losing territory in France because it doesn't mean anything to them. So you'd had a period of Richard, Duke of York, which is why the kind of Wars of the Roses kick off, is a lot of the nobility of lost lands in France. And so this kind of internecine.
How would you compare? That's a question I always had. How would you compare the great leaders of the English during the 100 Years' War with the leaders during the Wars of the Roses?
Well, if you want to know how good a war captain Edward IV was, he didn't fight the French. The French paid him off.
Okay.
After Edward won his civil war, and we have these Yorkist kings, the French king pays him off rather than invading. And there's big, like with Henry VIII, there's like a cloth of field of gold type situation where they have a big tournament and everybody's all chummy. But basically, the French king's like, we don't want another English army over here, especially not one that's been campaigning for 5 years in England. These guys are going to be hardcore. We can't deal with that. So let's just pay him and ask him to stay at home.
Okay.
So the people who emerge in the Wars of the Roses are great captains, but they are definitely, they suffer from the fact that people like John de Vere, the Earl of Oxford, he's in prison. He's one of the greatest captains, and he will lead Henry's vanguard at Bosworth, which ends the Wars of the Roses in 1485. But he's a prisoner of the French from the 100 Years' War. He doesn't appear till later until he's ransomed. Because he's a Lancastrian, the Yorkists are not interested in paying his ransom.
Yeah, but you know what's strange? It's strange that along the period of the 100 Years' War, now what you're telling me now about the Wars of the Roses, that some family names, and it was, sons or cousins, if they didn't have sons, the DNA was very good. You know what I'm saying? You have De Vere. De Vere was one of the most important commanders of the early part of the 100 Years' War, the Seven Elf of Oxford. Yeah. John De Vere was the first one, an amazing commander, the guy who moved the Longbowmen to the flank in Poitiers and managed to stop the charge of the French. You have the Earl of Oxford, generally during the 100 Years' War. You had the Salisburys, you have the Northamptons, you have some families that, although it was, son, cousin, maybe uncle, I would say similar with Douglas. Always Douglas was a great fighter, although, most of them were in the losing side. But, you cannot deny that the Douglases were a family that were of great commanders and great warriors. So it always not perplexed me, but I always thought that, in the end, DNA plays an important role, because you cannot have these families in the span of 200 years with great captains and great commanders. Something was there, something special.
Well, it could be DNA, but I think it's probably more nurture. It's not more nurture than nature. Is that these are the sons or the cousins of the great war captain, and as they sit around the dinner table as medieval knights, all they do is talk about their last campaigns. They hear from the horse's mouth how to beat the French. All the time.
They learn.
Probably trained by the same, group of weapon masters, weaponsmiths by the same people. The kind of culture. You need to think about medieval society. We tend to think of it as really static. It's like people live in their house, they go to work in the field outside. It's a lot more mobile than that. And certainly among the great houses, these people will be worked as pages for their, John De Vere's nephews were all in his house, and they were pages, and then they were footmen, and then they were squires. And they've lapped this stuff up, and maybe he didn't actually train them himself, but he certainly told his guys what to tell them. So I think that culture, and I think that experience of fighting, and battle is really, really important. That these kids were tutored by the right people, by the best, and it's when people have their own ideas about how to do it, that's when it goes wrong. It's when you get the incompetent king who, let's just do this, it's just overconfidence, those kind of problems. And I think the 100 Years' War in particular is a real testimony to the importance of military professionalism. I know you said, you talked about the Anglo-Scottish Wars as a kind of genesis of this, but it was a kingdom that was prepared to learn from its mistakes.
Yeah.
Because the way that the English had fought the Scots for 300 years was basically Norman. The Normans came to England with their stirrups and their lances, and they said, we are going to charge into them with such a big force of heavy cavalry that they won't stand up to it.
Like Hastings.
From Hastings to Bannockburn, that is how you do it.
Yeah.
The thing is, the French are still doing that at Crécy and Poitiers.
Yeah.
But actually, people have worked out a system for dealing with that.
Yeah, you're right.
The primacy of the shock that 2,000, 3,000 men at arms will win you on, in hack and tarnish with a couch lance will win you the battle.
Yeah,
that's how every major nation fought, from the Vikings, from the Normans to Crécy. At which point it started to change. And some people are not keeping up, is the thing, I think. And it's the professionalism that allows you to make those adaptations.
Yeah. No, the French, I think, fought like this even at, I think they changed the last, just before they started winning after Jean of Arc, I think, at that point, they started changing the strategy and taking advantage of the numbers, of the gunpowder, of the mobility. But until the Agincourt and Verneuil and all these battles of the mid of 14th century, 15th century, they were fighting still with the mounted knights
and mostly losing.
Well, if you see, except the period, the Caroline War, where the French won back, but they won back without any pitched battles. Basically, I told you it was like sieges, chevauchés that one really great commander, Bertrand Gauquelin, was leading. The rest, all the pitched battles, the major pitched battles and sieges were won by the English, and the downfall starts from Orléans, where the French win, and then you have a couple of battles that they start winning now, and then obviously the big battle of Castillon, where it's the end of the 100 Years' War. The English are out. But in general, if you see all the major battles and the major campaigns, there's just the English victories all the time. And it is strange. I wanted to ask always something. If you could, if somebody told you that you can watch a battle over the, we're not going to say all battles because people want to go. There is a huge, let's say, span of history. But if you could watch a medieval battle, or which one you would like to watch? I mean, I'm between Crécy and Agincourt. I don't know yet. I'll tell you the truth.
A medieval battle. Go on, John. Have you got any thoughts?
Well, I mean,
could be Hastings.
Or
Stamford Bridge, maybe. Stamford Bridge. Maybe I'm curious to see if actually there was a big Viking fighting the Normans for 1 hour until they managed to kill him. That's a good one.
I mean, does a stupid question? Does St Albans count in that? Is that still classed? The War of the Roses. You've just been talking about it forever. But yeah, only because it's down the way.
Is that first or second St Albans?
First, I think. The ridiculous one where people just sort of jump over back fences and then go and beat them up. That's first, first one. Only because it's down the road. There you go. But yeah, you're right. There are some I can imagine some quite key battles. I don't know if Kaiser's bound to have an opinion, but he's thinking he's
yeah. Well, because you've just like opened up like 300 battles. Which one would you like to be at? For me, the question is it's about defining why. It's like, John, you had good reasons for choosing that. St Albans is the next town over from where we are, right? So you're just inherently interested in that. That's as good a reason as any.
Yeah, for sure.
For me, seeing a great battle being won, like you mentioned Crécy and Poitiers, obviously this is like very the underdog completely wins. Crécy is the Cannae of the medieval period. It's a total massacre by an inferior force. But it clearly wasn't decisive, is the thing. The French raised another army the next year. The English did not become the kings of France after Poitiers. It took another 10 or 15 years of hard campaigning to get off of it. And to be fair, the English ancestors owned half of France. They were fighting for what was already theirs, or their ancestors anyway.
Yeah.
So for me, in terms of a battle in which something really changes and changes future history in the medieval period, I think Hastings is probably a big one. Like Hastings, if Hastings had been won by Godwinson, England would have remained a Saxon country, not a Norman French one. That would have the world history would be different.
Yeah, I get your point.
From that moment. Because the Normans were the empire builders, the Saxons weren't. Their ancestors had been, but they weren't. I'm not saying they were good guys, but in terms of late medieval, there was the Roses. It'd be the Battle of Towton for me. Not Towton, the Battle of Wakefield, because at Wakefield is when most of the Yorkists get killed.
Okay.
So Wakefield is Richard, Duke of York, and a couple of his other sons, but not Edward and not Richard. I can't even remember all their names now. Richard and the Earl of Clifford, I think, is the other one.
And Dave,
The youngest boy,
Dave.
and then Dave. They're at Wakefield, which is a great fortress on a hill, and they've sallied out to fight the Lancastrians, and they get slaughtered. And we don't know a huge amount about this battle because the people that won the battle didn't go on to win the war. And the people who went on to win the war got slaughtered in this battle. So we kind of know broadly like what happened. But after you get that revenge thing, right? You get like the terror bombing of London in World War II. It's supposed to knock us out of the war. It just solidifies people's desire to fight the Nazis. If you have a massacre like that and people are like, nah, mate, we got to fight these guys. They're evil. But Richard, Duke of York would be the leader of his house, not Edward IV. And Edward IV goes on to be one of England's greatest warrior kings and one of the last. So I think English history could have been quite different from that point. And certainly the Wars of the Roses wouldn't have played out the way it did if Richard, Duke of York had not died at Wakefield. So there you go. That was a long answer. What about you, Nick?
Good.
I don't know if it's. I think the battle that changed actually history in the 100 Years' War was Poitiers, because they captured the King of France.
Yeah.
So that was a critical battle, important battle. I mean, you never hear in any battle during the 100 Years' War in the middle you capture the King of France was captured. That's incredible what happened. So it will be interesting to Poitiers. But if from curiosity-wise, I would like to be at Agincourt just to see the numbers, because still there is a debate about the numbers. Were the French 40,000 or were they 14,000, and the English, were they 6 or were they 12? And also there is a great mystery for me in Agincourt, because you have these armies and you have these 6, 7, 8,000 dead from the French, and you have 200 dead from the English. It's crazy, you know what I mean? It doesn't make sense. It is like this, but it doesn't make sense. I would like to see, I mean, it's incredible that you have 6,000, 7,000 dead from an army of, I don't know, let's say 20,000, and you have just 200 dead from the English. This would have been interesting to watch how this happened. I mean, we know, but
yeah, it's one of those moments in history that are like tower defense computer games. So the English were using missile troops and the French were using melee troops, and they never got into contact.
Yeah, that'd be interesting, and to see this character.
Because the nature of Agincourt is it's sort of between two areas of woodland, so the battlefield is very narrow. So the French, if they're going to use their infantry or their cavalry, they can't also use their missile troops. There's no space to work around the flanks or to give covering fire of any description. So they just keep pitting their heavy, slow-moving foot and horse at the medieval equivalent of a machine gun battery.
That's true.
I actually think Agincourt, I don't think would be that interesting a battle to watch. Because I think it is like a tower defense video game. I know it's a bit of a crude analogy, but the numbers, the same happened at the Battle of Omdurman in the 1880s. It's just like the other guys, where you got like 20,000 dead on one side and 12 on the other. Like, they never got into contact. Yeah, this is the like great. That's why Kitchener is such a hero before the First World War. He's the guy that won the Battle of Omdurman, which was a complete massacre because the other guys never got into contact.
Okay, I never knew that. That's great.
So, Nick, you've been reading and writing and making videos about 100 Years' War for longer than I've been YouTubing, because when I started, you were already pretty established. But recently, you've been dabbling in. So these are big battles by the period, right? These are kind of minimum 5,000 guys aside, and often much bigger for the French. But recently, you've started looking at the Barons' War. So, for the benefit of the viewers, then, what is the Barons' War?
Well, how I started Baron's War was the period I started wargaming with my 15 MMs. I liked the period a lot. I mean, the feudal era, and my first armies. Not well, I was not in YouTube or anything at that time. Where Baron's War was some Essex at that time, was a long time ago. And then I found out about 100 Years' War and started, loving the period and focused there. The Baron's War I'm gaming now, it's the first Baron's War that I didn't know much about. I knew about the second Baron's War, a lot of stuff. I knew about Simon de Montfort, Battle of Lewes, Battle of Evesham, and a more recent period in a way, 1265. But around the 1200s and 1214, 1215, before the Magna Carta, I didn't know much about, we knew about Richard the Lionheart, and then his John the Lackland, and then when the Barons War started. But I didn't know much. So it was very interesting for me to start reading about the period when I started collecting miniatures. I like the miniatures because I always like this. What I like from Baron's War miniatures, like Footsore and other manufacturers, is that the combination of the different material. You don't have typically plate armor there. You have chainmail, you have padded jackets, you have leather jackets, you have normal clothes, and painting them is quite interesting as well. So I like the miniatures, I like the period, but I didn't know much about. So I was reading books. I was, from the web and magazines and everything, just to know a little bit more. It's very strange because there's no major battle. The biggest battles were, a few thousand men at the maximum. You know what I'm saying? For example, the most famous battle, the Battle of Lincoln, where the royalist forces had, 300 knights and 1,000 peasants and 200 crossbows. And this was considered a big army. And the French had, maybe double, but again, 2,000 and 500 knights. It's not huge armies that we used to in the big battles of the 100 Years' War. And the Battle of Lincoln is considered a big battle and famous battle for the Baron's War, the first Baron's War and sieges. And something else that I never really knew, it was that half of the south of England was under French occupation. And I was not aware of this, that the French had, all the south, or they were controlling in a way. Because, they were there, from what I understand, they were there. They were bringing forces. It was contested. I didn't even know that, to tell you the truth, that there were French units there, and barons obviously who were with the French, like Fitzwalter, the barons that were supported by the French, like Robert Fitzwalter, for example, who was the leader of the baronial revolt. But I was not aware that was occupied. There were many French, but there were French forces in England. I was not really aware of this. I was surprised when I read it.
Okay, all right. Nick.
I hate you. I hate you.
It's right. This is.
They were French, but they were French, correct?
Right, but so were the English lords.
Yeah.
Oh.
William of Normandy is a French duke. He comes to England, conquers England, and replaces pretty much 97% of the English aristocracy with French lords. Most of them have lands in France. Through dynastic marriages and so forth, England basically controls from sort of Harfleur down to the Spanish border.
Okay.
So when you talk about French control, because now one of the things that definitely happens to the Normans and their descendants is they're very good at cultural assimilation. Is they marry local women, they adopt local customs, they take them on. But identity is very different in the medieval period to what it is now. So your average commoner doesn't really identify as anything other than like, I work for him, and I'm either a tenant or I'm a yeoman farmer and I have my own bit of land. But the nobility would see themselves, and I wouldn't necessarily couch it in those terms, as part of a pan-European culture group. They were knights, and they would admire, you know, when we talked about the 100 Years' War, we talked about the Blind Prince of Bohemia. He is a Czech knight, but he is very highly regarded in England and in France as one of the greatest knights in the kingdom. And all of the lords and the knights saw themselves as part of that culture, and its lingua franca was French. And because there'd been crusades, these people had lands in France, lands in England, lands in Spain, and lands possibly even as far away as Jerusalem. And so when you start talking about French occupation, these guys definitely could recruit troops in France and bring them to England.
I get your point,
Yeah. So, but and which is why the King of England was fighting the 100 Years' War, claiming to be the King of France, because he had a better claim to it than the actual guy who took the job on. But it's not just dynastic, is what I'm saying. So, identity is a complicated thing in the medieval period, but the kind of, I'm not sure the degree to which the French, particularly, identified as French, but the English did. And that's one of the things that was quite important, I think. So if you look at the conquest of Scotland versus the conquest of Wales, Wales is pretty much a done deal, despite being very popular at very difficult terrain for English knights and men-at-arms to fight in. The Scots had a sense of Scottishness, as the Welsh were quite factional, and that meant English dominant. There wasn't that kind of national identity. They definitely were part of a culture group, but they probably hated each other more than they hated the English. This is like super simplifying a really complicated thing. But and what I'm trying to suggest to you is that, like, nationhood and national identity, kingdoms of the medieval period are not nation states, and its inhabitants do not necessarily regard themselves. They are absolutely not citizens of a country. They are subjects of a lord, and that lord probably speaks a different language, even if it's French. So, so it's kind of like looking at it with modern eyes would see like a French occupation of southern England, saying, well, why didn't they take over? Say, well, because they were working for the lords that had lands in southern England and were fighting this. But anyway, the Barons' War then. So the Barons' War is one of these many civil wars that we've had in England. The Wars of the Roses, which we don't call a civil war, and the Barons' Wars is another. You've mentioned it's in the 1200s. So this is contemporary with Robin Hood. He's very much part of that period, isn't he? It's that kind of medieval England. There is
I was reading about, I forget the name, I can go and pick the book here in the other room. There is one historical character who was fighting at that period. He was a squire fighting, for example, the barons and whatever French reinforcements they brought from the mainland France. And I was reading that he most probably was the let's say the inspiration behind Robin Hood myth, but I forget his name. I forget his name. He was an actual character. He was fighting at that period. I have the book. I can bring it. There's no issue. But again, very interesting characters at that period. You know, the nobles, very interesting characters. I say Robert Fitzwalter, for example, that is one, you know, very, very, very important character for the rebel barons. Obviously, this was considered the most famous knight of England. What's his name? I forget now.
Oh God! Soon I know nothing.
Yeah, I forget the name. a very famous.
Galahad.
But, forget the name. I have the book on the other side.
I do know who you're talking about. I just can't remember. This is there's a book called The Greatest Night, isn't there?
Yeah.
And it's I forget the details of the story.
Mine there is I forgot it now. And I have him here as a miniature. And
William Marshall.
William Marshall, who's a great, and he was around for example in the Battle of Lincoln. He was 75 years old or 70, and he was still fighting. So again, very interesting characters. I think from a period that obviously England didn't have an identity, as we were saying before. There were Norman lords who had lands everywhere, and we know that Richard the Lionhearted was speaking French, and he stayed in England 9 months in his whole life. So a very interesting period, very interesting battles, and I like it because they're not these huge battles. These are small battles of 1,000, 2,000 men, sieges, small campaigns, chevauchés in a way that they were not chevauchés at that time. Hit and run tactics, ambushes. Very different period, and quite interesting. Very different armor. Chainmail was predominant at that time. The war horse and the mounted knights were the tanks of the period. There was nothing to counter them. You had obviously archers, but they were not used the way that Edward III used them. So a very interesting and colorful period with many nobles, intrigue. I'm reading it and painting miniatures. I'm really enjoying it. I'm really enjoying it.
Good.
So
you do some beautiful pictures too. Sorry.
No, sorry. You mentioned Footsore in the mix there. So if anyone doesn't watch Nick's stuff, I highly recommend that you do. You've done a lot of rules reviews and rules breakdowns over the last few years, and you've just been playing. So normally you play kind of mass battle stuff like 15 mil or even sometimes 25s, but it's about having 400 figures on the battlefield, right?
At least.
Normally we do, yeah. And that, whereas this, you've been playing a little bit of Baron's War, which at Footsore, we had Andy Hobday on, who did he write or did he co-write the rules? I can't remember. It's his rule set.
Yeah, it's Baron's Wars. Baron's
Wars. Yeah. And there's several supplements because he sent us some, and I've got to say I was a little bit taken aback by it's one of them books. It's a paperback that's about half an inch thick, but it weighs a lot. It's quite heavy, it's quite dense, and there's lots of rules and there's loads of supplements for it.
They have campaigns that I'm playing. They have a very good production, let's say.
Yeah. There's loads of supplements for it, isn't there? If you're into that, but there's also quite an interesting range of miniatures that go with it, because it is at its heart the Baron's War, like you said. 1,000 men is like the biggest battle of the era. If we haven't said, because I'm not sure we were that explicit, it's basically a series of it's a civil war type scenario. They're internecine wars. It's great lords fighting each other for all the usual important stuff, land and territory, and a weak king is the important thing.
Exactly,
a king that can't bring them to heel and stop them killing each other because of their local territorial disputes, or you married my niece and you mistreated her, you bugger, so I'm going to take your castle, or whatever. And it's in a situation where, as I said, the feudal system. So this understand what the feudal system is like. Okay, I'm the big daddy. I am the Earl of Lincoln. I earn Lincoln and all of the things around it. Yeah. And that's how it is when William the Conqueror comes over, because he appoints new people, right? So the Earl of Lincoln, all the land around Lincoln is his or his tenants or his knights. Right?
Yeah, the Doomsday Book, you know about
The
this.
Doomsday Book, exactly.
Yeah.
One of the things about the Doomsday Book's really interesting is it takes account of these things at 2 dates, and that's why we know it's total replacement. It says,
Yeah.
who owned the land in the time of King Edward, as in the Edward that died and came to steal the kingdom from, and who owns it now?
Yeah.
And what it showed you was, obviously, all of these people who owned land at the time of King Edward, none of them own it now.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Yeah,
what's changed is that everything has changed. Norman lords everywhere. Took it all. Right. But then when this guy dies and passes his bits on to his 3 sons and a daughter, his daughter gets a dowry, which is this manor goes off to that guy she marries. And his 3 sons, you get to be earl, and you 2 get to be lords of little bits elsewhere in this. You do that for 5 generations, and the Earl of Lincoln doesn't own any land in Lincoln, but he does own a lot of land.
Yeah.
All in little bits all over the place, but these big blocks don't really exist in the same way. So what that means is when you get the Barons' War, is everybody's got a castle with 50 men at arms, or 10 of them. How do I get 5,000 men together? So I have to empty all of these little groups of men I've got all over the place.
Yeah.
So there's loads of kind of 200-man skirmishes as I try and take one of your pokey little castles that you've forgotten about and used to be my dad's.
And that makes it interesting. I like the idea of these battles, that they are 200-300 men or 400, or considering, if you consider 500 men, it's not a small battle. I was reading somewhere that in the medieval times, a battle was considered, if you were over 100 men, it was considered a battle. Yeah, I was very surprised I read this. But it's yes. I was never playing skirmish rules because I have very big armies, 28 MMs, and I like big battles. And I started playing skirmish rules the last year, especially here in the Middle East where I'm working, and I don't have my house. I'm living on my own, so you can imagine I don't have a bigger house, so the space is limited. But not only because of this, because you don't. It's much easier to move individual based miniatures than to move miniatures based on big bases and our big armies. It's a shame. Small miniatures very easy individually to pack them, and
you don't mean move in the game, you mean move from place to place.
Yeah, move from place to place, or like this, because in my work you are one city in 1 or 2 years, then another city. It depends where you require. But it's easier, to have something. So when I started painting individual-based miniatures that you can use with table trays for big battles anyway in the future, I never played skirmish rules. I was basically snubbing them. I was calling them to my friends who were playing pub rolls. I don't like, I never played battles, especially when I got established as a wargamer. My games are, I don't think they're less than 400 or 500 miniatures on a table, especially the 100 Years' War. But I started with, but I realized that by playing skirmish rules, and the first skirmish rule I played was Billhooks, the deluxe, that actually is not a skirmish rule. And then I went to Blood and Crowns, an excellent game from Firelock, and recently Barons' War. I realized that the only difference in a way of skirmish rules is that basically the points of your armies are based on individual miniature than on a unit. That's the only major difference. The rules, I have to say, sometimes skirmish rules are rather more complicated because they micromanage a battle. They're rather more complicated than actual, Hail Caesar or sword point rules that have a different, big unit, let's say, philosophy. I've realized that they're sometimes even more realistic and more complicated than actual big battle rules, and sometimes, not sometimes, most of the time, take more time to finish. All rules can accommodate big battles. I mean, I've played skirmish rules with 100 or 150 miniatures. You cannot say this is a skirmish battle, but they can accommodate very small battles because the points, if people are interested in points of armies, are based on individual miniatures. So you can have a unit with 4 miniatures if you want, rather than having a unit with 4 miniatures in Hail Caesar that you cannot, because it's based on on big bases. So I started enjoying a lot and seeing that these rules can accommodate, bigger battles, because my skirmish armies are quite big. I mean, my 100 Years' War skirmish armies are around 150, 160 miniatures. And now with Footsore that I finished, and I will show you some minis I have here. I finished my first, let's say, batch. It's 140 miniatures, and I ordered another 30. I realized that you can play big battles with skirmish games. It is, and they're not that much different than actual big battle games. Actually, I would say they're more complicated in some cases, because they really micromanage the battlefield. Because if you play the skirmish games as they're intended, with maybe 15 miniatures a side or 20, you need to have mechanics that won't finish the game in 10 minutes. You know what I'm saying? So there is a lot of micromanaging melee or micromanaging morale. That it's quite interesting, actually. I found it quite interesting, and I find it very realistic in some cases.
Nick, you just mentioned two very different systems that you've been using. The first one you mentioned was Bill Hooks, which we had a guy on Bill Hooks, and that Bill Hooks is a very straightforward, sort of simple. I don't mean this in a negative way. It's almost like the beer and pretzels end of wargaming, which is the kind of wargaming that I like. I want my, I want my cannon to maybe blow up when I roll it if I'm playing a skirmish game. I like randomness. I want fun. Partly because I think war games have never been a good simulation of anything. I just kind of can the idea that it's a simulation, especially when you talk about medieval battle. We don't even really know how men fought. We just have ideas, manuals. We don't recreate it because people will die. But then you mentioned Baron's War, and it's like, so is it one very simple type like Black Powder or Hail Caesar. It's not, the game's still got granularity, but it is at its core quite simple. And then Baron's War, which is far more involved. There's loads of granularity. I mean, there's a couple of thousand pages of rules for Baron's War if you want to get all the booklets. So where do you stand on the two, and which do you like about either and all?
Look, I will tell you, I will put also in the mix Blood and Crowns, because I'm very familiar with the game as well. I played a lot of Blood and Crowns. The advantage of Baron's War, and what I said, I've done a review about it on the channel, and I have good relation with the guys on Barons, and I have excellent relation with Firelock Games. Actually, they're using my channel and photographs from my channel for their next promotions.
Nice.
They're going to use photographs. They asked me, and they can use all the photographs posted, and they're going to use them in their edition, and hopefully they're going to enjoy that. It's fine. In Baron's War, if the rules, if you read the rules, they are very straightforward, and they are quite simple. What they've done, and that's very clever, is that they've done a lot of special rules and customizing that you may want to do or may not want to make the game as complicated or as different as you like. You know what I'm saying? If you keep to the straight core rules, it's fine. It's basic melee. You're fighting. You defend. You lose miniatures. You push back. You make a break test if you lose 25%, 50%, like this. You know what I mean? The basic mechanics that most games have. But then there is 50, 60 pages of customizing army, customizing different weapons, have different abilities, different advantages, abilities, characteristics of commanders, special rules for weapons, that this add to the complexity of the game. And this is the big number, the huge number of pages that you see. You can use this if you want. And I like it because I like reading rules, and I like a lot of games like this, because by customizing a battle with all these options, you can have the same miniatures and fight a different battle every day. You understand what I'm saying? And this is very important. It's very clever what they did. So, but at the same time, if you don't want to customize that much, if you don't want to have the inspire ability, if you don't want to have the faith ability for your priest, and you want to have the core numbers, you know, defense, what, you know, he's wearing chainmail or he's wearing padded. It's a very straightforward, very easy to remember, very easy to understand rule set. And the same with Blood and Crowns, an excellent rule set. That I'm expecting the book, because I have the PDF now, recently now, a very well thought rule set that has special rules that you can add to your units, you can add to your commanders, but as a core set is quite straightforward. So I think Baron's War is more than Blood and Crowns. Blood and Crowns has a bit less customizing, but in Baron's Wars they achieved this, and I was very, very, very impressed that you can make it as complicated as you want, and you can have the same 50 miniatures, and depending on how you will customize and what abilities you will give to your commander and how you will customize your troops, you can fight a different battle every time. And I think this is very clever what they did. Also, I like because they have a lot of support of the game. They have 4 campaigns. Actually, I fought the first battle of the most ignoble feud, and actually was very popular. I think I got in one day 1,200 views. And they have these 4 or 5 campaigns. Lackland Goes North, the most ignoble feud. What's the other one? They have another one. They have English Worthy Man of English Blood, and one more. These are campaigns that basically they're a series of battles that have consequences, you know, some really innovative ideas there. And they have a lot of support for the game. So I found the rules very well thought of. I don't know if you can say historically accurate, but obviously, you know, if you charge with your mounted knights at braced spears, you're going to lose. You know what I'm saying? So the basics are there. I found some very interesting rules that, I mean, the special rules that are around 20 pages for your commanders. You can be, you know,
Nick, I just want to interject there, if you will, because
sure.
This is set in the 1200s, not the 1400s, right?
Yeah, 1200s. Yeah.
If you charge with your knights against braced spears, you'll win.
Yeah, you usually win. That's true. Yeah.
In that period, but
you have a chance.
That's the thing, is that, and this is one of the really important things about granularity in history and historical period. It's like, as gamers, you know, it's thinking a braced spear is absolutely going to defeat a charging horse. Saying, well, the experience of the Normans through to Crécy and Poitiers is that's not true. That mounted knight will pile through a pile of spearmen every time. Every time. It's going to win you not just battles, it's going to win you. You get yourself a couple of thousand mounted knights and you are going to win a war.
Yeah, obviously this time,
everybody's got spear. And it's interesting because this is going back to that, if you'll forgive me for just kind of going off on a tangent.
No, it's okay.
This is just going back to the simulation problem that I have, is I can't see how hundreds of mounted knights charge into a load of braced spears and don't all get kebabbed. But what we know about Hastings and everything from Hastings to Crécy is that they didn't all get kebabbed, and they did win. It was the winning formula, which is why I want to go back to saying about games. Try and make a simulation. And someone tell me how that worked, because everything that I know about military tactics tells me that really is the most stupid thing you could do.
That's true. But in the end, the simulation maybe not that fun. You know what I mean? It has to be a little more playable to enjoy.
Absolutely.
So they have all these special rules that you can make the game as complicated as you want or as simple as you want. And actually and this is stayed in my mind, they have one rule that I don't know if the guys who are watching today or anybody have seen it anywhere before, but because I'm a rule buff and I read any type of rule that will come on, and I really enjoy reading rules. I've never seen. They have the Barded Warhorse Overcharge. And this is one of the most fun rules I've ever played. So you have again, the customization of the rules is amazing. Yeah, you have barded warhorse, or you have simple warhorse, or you have a simple mount. They're different mounts. And they give you different speeds, but they give you different strengths, you know what I mean, depending, the barded warhorse. So the barded warhorse, although it's a tank, and it gives, for example, if you have a barded warhorse, in order to kill a knight, you need to roll 2 hits, for example. That's one rule. But if you win the battle, you're subject to overcharge, meaning that you have to roll a die plus the hits you score, and you have to move 10, 15, 12 inches, depending on what you roll, away further from your opponent. And
it breaks through.
Yeah, it breaks through. And this has amazing consequences. You may hit a building for a skirmish rule and lose people there. You may enter difficult terrain and have problems there. And then, in order for you to, in the next round, to be able to move again, you need to take a morale test to rein in the horses. Now, this micromanaging is very exciting for me. And this specific rule, when I read it, I was very surprised that they thought of this. And it adds a strategic option. You're playing a skirmish, big skirmish game. Usually skirmish games have a lot of terrain. Okay, I want the barded warhorse because it's a tank. It will give me 1 extra die in hitting and 1 extra die, and I have to get 2 hits to remove 1 miniature. But in this congested field, I will overcharge, and I don't know where I'm going to go. And then I need 1 turn to rein in the horses, and maybe my opponent, this gap of me trying to overcharge and reining the horses, you will find an opportunity to do something else. So, you know what I'm saying? Micromanaging, but at the same time, very fun.
Right.
I mean,
Go on, John.
no, I was going to say micromanaging never seemed like a fun option, but yeah, it is for you, so that's good.
Well, we have slightly overrun, so we probably need to think about wrapping things up. Nick, it's been great having you on.
Great to be here.
I think you have told me already, actually, but you're obviously a Greek chap yourself.
Yeah.
What's wrong with hoplites, mate? I've been playing Rome Total War for the past weekend and loving it on the PC. What is wrong with an oily man in a muscled cuirass with a big spear and a gold and a bronze shield? What is wrong with that? Why are you not doing that?
Nothing is wrong with that, but I'll tell you why. When you're born in Greece and you are around these things from the first day of your life, you go to the battlefields, you know, Marathon is beside, Salamis is beside, and all the big battles, Thermopylae is beside. You go to the museums, you see all these things every day from school with your mother, with your father. You go to the Parthenon, you go to the, it's part of your everyday life, like going and eating, a kebab, you know what I'm saying? And after drinking in London, you know what I'm saying? So it's so familiar. It's not exotic for you anymore. You know what I'm saying? I don't know if I make sense. It's something that is mundane. It's something that is part of your culture, part of your everyday life. It doesn't excite you as an English knight. You know what I'm saying? I don't know if I make sense.
Yeah.
No, you make perfect sense, because I think a lot of English people don't play the 100 Years' War and stuff.
Yeah,
like that.
exactly.
Same reason.
Yeah. So when you are part of this, of your everyday life, you know it. You see it doesn't remove you from the reality to paint a hoplite. You know, you understand what I'm saying? It's part of your culture. It's part there where you have them. You have small statues, maybe, or whatever. But painting an English knight, painting William Marshall, painting Henry V, painting Bernard de Guesclin, painting Marshal Boucicaut, and playing Agincourt, it's different for me. It's takes me out of my my comfort zone, my reality, and it gives me my fantasies is more excited than something that I was from the first day I was born. I was taught and I saw it. I mean, if I tell some people that I've been in Marathon 50 times and Salamis 500 times, they will tell me, oh God, I want to go there. But I've been swimming there. You know what I'm saying? I went swimming when I was a young kid. And I was in Thermopylae, in the statue of Leonidas, when I was going with my father and my family vacations in northern Greece. We're passing and stopping there every day. I've been there 200 times. So it is something that doesn't excite me in a way. If I want to make like this,
That's
I just love the idea that you feel the way about William Marshall or the Earl of Salisbury that I feel about Achilles or Agamemnon or whatever. It's completely the opposite. But
yeah,
what's exotic to me is passe to you, and vice versa, and vice versa. Nick, if people want to come find you on the YouTube, just remind them what your
Medieval Wargamer YouTube channel. They can find me there. Before we go, let me show you one miniature I want to show you. This is one of my favorite miniatures I painted recently. This is 3D print from Historia Studios, and this is my first bishop, and that's why I like them, because it is. I don't know. I have this.
Oh no, we lost him.
Wait, let me remove the background. The background is here. He's one of my. I've recently purchased some 3D prints, and I tell you something. I never did this. I was never into this, but some of them are really beautiful. Yeah, and it's a nice miniature. I have it on the channel showcased many times. So that's why I'm excited about the medieval times. You have bishops, men of cloth, killing people. You know what I'm saying?
There's actually a great line on the Bayeux Tapestry, because we mentioned William the Bastard earlier, and the inscription reads, I can't remember which bishop it is, but it says he comforts the troops. And then there's a picture of the bishop with a club bashing his own troops with a club to get them moving forwards. Because the word comfort, of course, is fort, as in strength. It's like the bishop strengthens the troops. He's getting them riled up. He's bashing them around, saying, "Come on, get ready to fight." I just love that kind of the modern use of the word means something quite different. Nick, it's been great having you on. It's always good to chat medieval history.
Always pleasure.
Another coat of yellow on a million tanks. This is the Panther that I will be playing Achtung Panzer with quite soon. And I also, while I had the Middlestone out, did a whole bunch of 15 mil. Flames of War tanks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them. John, what about you? What'd you paint?
Not a lot. Big. I did the Atlas. He's finished.
Nice.
And the Archer's nearly done as well. Will we ever play this game? I doubt it, but it was a bit of fun. Whilst I tried to absorb that massive amount of information from your beautiful voice and beautiful hexagon. And that's why you should go to his channel, because it's beautiful miniatures and his beautiful voice. So
thank you guys. Thank you.
And a lot of, if you're interested in medieval gaming and you didn't know, a lot of rules have been reviewed in great detail.
That's quite important.
Breakdowns. If you want to learn how to play Sword Point, I think Nick has done more content on that than anyone else.
Yeah, Sword Point was my favorite rule set for big battles at the beginning. Yeah, sure. It's a good point.
Yeah. All right. And it's been a pleasure having you on. And next
pleasure
week,
to be here.
We have got Friends of General Haig coming on. He's going to give us a pike and shot era battle report walkthrough, illustrated with pictures from his diorama.
Nice.
Next week is also on the Saturday is Salute. If you are there and you see us, come over and say hello. A couple of us are going to be helping out with Duncan Spanner Brothers on his D-Day boards. I think Wooly's going to be there all day. I'm just going to go for an hour so that people can go to have a sandwich or something, take a break from the demo board. Other than that, hope you enjoyed the video we put out last week on building the desert board, which took a long time to make and put together. but it is finally done.
Good.
And we actually had a game of SPQR, didn't we, John?
We did. It was a long time coming, and quite interesting to try and get back into that set of rules. But see how the guys get on with editing it.
I've got to do all the edits and stuff. So a while before you see it, but we have actually played a game. It is in the works. So anyway, thank you for watching, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.